literally means 1,000 hammerings and 100 temperings. It evokes the image of iron being repeatedly struck and reheated until it becomes steel. Figuratively, it describes something or someone refined through sustained, often painful practice or trials, whether that's a manuscript polished through many edits, a skill forged by long hours of practice, or a person who grows wiser and tougher after repeated life challenges. Eli kept a list of drafts on his laptop. Each file name was an attempt displaced in time: proposal_v2, proposal_v2_really, proposal_final_ish, and so on. Proposal_v2, proposal_v2_really, proposal_final_ish. The folders were a kind of archaeology. You could read his progress in imperfect outlines and deleted paragraphs. He learned, the hard way, that the first version of anything was mostly a way to clear the throat. Real work lived in the edits. He lived in a building where the elevator hummed the same tired tune every morning and where the cafe on the corner served the same overly sweet oat latte to the same people. Eli was a product manager at a mid-sized tech startup that made a budgeting app nobody could quite explain at dinner parties. He loved clarity, a feature description that cut through the fuzz like a cold window scrubbed clean, but he had discovered that clarity rarely arrived fully formed. It arrived, instead, from a sequence of small, abrasive encounters with users, with with a designer who refused to compromise on a microcopy, with his own impatience. One mild autumn, his manager assigned him to lead a revamp of the app's onboarding. The company wanted better conversion numbers. The board wanted headlines. Eli wanted people to actually understand why the product might matter. He started with a map, flowcharts, metrics, interviews. He wrote messaging in the office pantry at midnight and rewrote it in the taxi. He watched test users frown and click away, and then tried to listen like he had skin thick enough to take the sting of honest feedback. At first, the changes were cosmetic. A new headline here, fewer steps there. The analytics glowed green in places for a day and returned to meh. The team grew restless. Investors asked if the sprint was strategic. The designer, Priya, who had a surgical attention to micro-interactions, commented in a document, "Feels like we're sweeping the floor while the roof leaks." She was blunt but right. Eli felt the heat. Something in their approach was still forged from convenience instead of need. One evening, after a demo that had failed to excite, Eli walked across the river to an old bookstore. Rain set the city into a soft blur. He liked bookstores because their silence held other people's slow thinking, the kind that had time to be wrong, corrected, then valuable. He bought a slim book on revision and a second-hand edition of essays. On the subway home, he read a line that stopped him cold: "A finished thing means nothing until you have found its friction." The phrase lodged like a compass needle. He began to change his process. Instead of polishing language in isolation, he put the product before strangers and told them, simply, "Here's what I think it does." They told him it felt like an accountant wearing sneakers. Trustworthy but joyless. Others said it felt aspirational but irrelevant. Eli took notes without defending himself. He stopped treating the drafts as evidence of correctness and started treating them as drafts of something that might become true after repeated pressure. They iterated. A week of testing revealed that users wanted one honest promise, not 3 optimistic ones. Priya cut the headline down to 5 words that felt like an apology and a dare at once. The engineers reduced the time to first action by 30 seconds, which in this world was a small eternity. Eli rewrote the copy until he could say it aloud without flinching. Each change felt like a strike of the hammer, small, sometimes ugly, often noisy. With each strike, something hardened, not brittle, but steady. Outside of work, Eli's life was being tempered too. He had friends who joked about his obsessive editing, but he also had an estranged sister he hadn't spoken to in years. They'd split over directions. She'd chosen a quieter, less impressive path after their mother's death. He'd chosen a career that promised recognition. The silence between them had been a wound that tightened when he tried to speak. He thought about the way metal did not become steel in a single fire. There was a rhythm to healing, a series of small exposures to heat and pounding that, over time, rearranged the grain. He called her. The first conversations were short, loaded with old habits. There were moments of defensiveness and of recollection. He said things he regretted. She said things that shifted his understanding. They agreed to coffee. Neither of them fixed everything in a single sitting. But the micro-edits mattered, a question asked differently, a memory listened to instead of answered. Their relationship did not snap into place overnight. It thickened. Quietly. Like tempered glass learning to flex. 6 months in, the onboarding relaunch went live. Metrics improved. Yes. But more importantly, the product felt less like a suit tailored to impress a stranger and more like clothing that fit. On launch day, a small message appeared in their community forum. I actually used this to set a first budget. It didn't talk down to me. The comment was modest and, for Eli, it was like hearing steel ring when struck properly. He kept his folder of final_ish drafts and added a note at the top, tempered, keep striking. Tempered, keep strike. He had come to understand that refinement is not a one-time victory. It is an ongoing discipline. The idiom, 1,000 hammerings, 100 temperings, wasn't about endurance for endurance's sake. It was about intentional pressure, applied with attention, until the results served purpose rather than pretense. Years later, when the company started advising smaller teams, Eli found himself telling the junior product managers the same thing he had learned in the bookstore under Rain. Don't mistake the first draft for the finished thing. Find the friction and let it shape you. He meant this for code, for copy, for relationships. He meant it as a philosophy of work and life, small, honest pressures, repeated, will do the heavy forming that sudden triumphs cannot. On quiet nights, he sometimes wandered the same riverwalk and listened to footsteps in the rain. He thought of the hammer's rhythm, of the heat and the cooling and the patient attention. The city around him kept demanding speed. Headlines, virality. But the object on his desk, a simple, well-used notebook where he scribbled test user quotes and awkward drafts and real apologies to his sister, reminded him of a different tempo. The world liked spectacle. He had learned to prefer the steady, grinding insistence of craft. Eli did not imagine a perfect ending. He imagined a life that continued to be shaped, a career that would require more edits, friendships that would need tending, a self that would be softened and toughened in turns. The point wasn't to arrive at a finished steel that never changed. It was to accept the process and show up for the hammering. In the steady echo of repeated work, he had found something like peace, not because the work was over, but because he trusted the shaping.